Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the EmbellishPod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at EmbellishPod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today I have the folks from New Riff joining me. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. There's even a few things that are being released on this particular episode that are hinting towards some potential future releases that you might have an interest in trying to make your way to Kentucky to pick up. This morning or afternoon or whenever you happen to be consuming this, I have Molly and Jay from New Riff Distilling joining me to talk through some things that are happening there. If you could just, Molly first, and then Jay, if you'll give me the quick elevator speech on who you are real quick.
Absolutely. Well, hi, John. Thanks for having us. My name is Molly Lewis. I am officially the president of New Riff as of about 6 weeks ago. My father, Ken Lewis, is our owner and founder, and he retired in mid-March as our CEO. So we are in the middle of a transitory year. It's very exciting here at New Riff. And I want to also welcome Jay Arisman, who is my vice president and co-founder.
Hello. So I founded New Riff along with Ken from the Party Source, which is the large retail operation. Let me figure out this interweb. If you were in our parking lot and you went that way, you would find a Titanic liquor store called the Party Source. And that is where we come from. I went to work for Ken in 2001. And cutting the long story very short, we thought eventually it would be a grand idea if he sold that store. And Ken, by the way, he sold the store to the employees. He didn't sell it to the highest bidder and make the most money. He sold it arguably to the lowest bidder, and but did right by them. And so now it is an employee-owned Titanic liquor store, one of the biggest in the country or world. And that's the Party Source. That's where we come from. So we've been in another segment of this industry, in Ken's case, since about 1974.
So, the New Riff, I guess we're quickly approaching the 10-year anniversary of New Riff. So New Riff is, I guess when you compare it against the heritage brands, it is new. When you compare it against the thousands of craft distilleries that have opened up in the last 5 years, it's not quite as new. What is the ethos of New Riff? There's the mission statement, there's the marketing statement, and there's sort of the identity of it.
Well, you can start. I will chime in and start with the back of the bottle that says a new riff on an old tradition. The old tradition being sour mash Kentucky whiskey, and that we know the tradition. We work within it. The name was derived from. I wish I could say I came up with the name New Riff, because I'm a guitar player. I make riffs and I play riffs, but it wasn't me. It was Ken who thought of, let's consider the distiller like a musician. And he knows that tradition, he works within it, but he plays it differently every time. He improvises, he plays a new riff on it. So we work within that tradition. We're not here to tear down the old guard and reinvent the wheel or anything like that, but we are here to give ourselves largesse and freedom and plenty of room to improvise and to change things and do things the way they maybe haven't been done before. And to that end, we play new riffs, if you will, on Kentucky whiskey, I guess.
I also want to add that being family owned is extremely important to us here at New Riff. It's part of Ken's legacy to ensure that the business, that New Riff, stays family owned. And now my legacy to get New Riff to the next generation, to our third generation of ownership and leadership. It's very hard to stay family owned. Most distilleries, want to sell as a result of a success problem, right? They grow to a certain size, they have a certain amount of success, and then it's very expensive to maintain, and your employees grow, and you want to double your production or increase your production, and everything grows, and it's hard to maintain independence. And so that is something that is crucial to our identity. It's something that we live and die by here at New Riff, and something we talk about a lot internally, and really want to be known for externally as well. Being our size and being family owned, we think is really unique, and something to be identified for.
Absolutely. And I like the point that you made, Jay, about the distiller being like a musician, because there's sort of like the mechanics of musicianship, right? Where you can learn how to play an instrument, but then there's the art part of it, which is completely different, right?
Mhm.
And you can, in the same way, you could learn the mechanics of making whiskey and then ultimately not create something that is artful. And then Molly, back to something you said there, given the nature of this market, that happens a lot, right? The purchase of a brand is seen as a part of a success situation. And I think it's, at least from my perspective, I've followed New Riff for quite a while. It has appeared that you guys have not positioned the company to do the same thing that other brands are doing. Instead of trying to, storm the market and, kind of show everybody that you guys are kind of top, you're building a solid repertoire of whiskeys. You're building a solid market presence, a solid host of anything, with the interest of having something to turn over to the next generation. I guess, what does it look like? If you turn this over to the next generation 10, 15, 20 years from now, what does New Riff look like?
Well, gosh, that's a great question. I mean, we're just getting our bearings as the second generation. So hold on, most of our children are all pretty young at this point. So hopefully they'll be interested in the business and want to be a part of New Riff in the third generation. But no, it is very important to us. It is our ethos. It is our legacy. We feel that we can be very hands-on with our size and with the team here. So it's part of our culture to remain family owned. That's not to knock other businesses that have made decisions to sell or to grow. We just want to take care of our little corner of the world. We want our employees to feel that they are treated as part of the family. We want to be known for being family owned. And that way we maintain control. We can really focus on our independence and on what we're putting in bottle, and not cut any corners at any point. And
Right.
so that is the goal. And in 15, 20 years down the road, that will continue to be the goal. I don't predict that New Riff will be so much larger than we are right now. We've grown tremendously over the past 10 years. We started as an 8-employee team. We're up to over 80 employees if you count part-time staff. So we are growing. We like to say we're out of our infancy, we're into our toddlerhood, we're plateauing. Maybe we'll hire another 10 or 15 employees, but I don't predict that we'll be much bigger than we are currently. And we're controlling the amount of output of cases that we want to release to the market too. We want to be in the right places, the places that understand New Riff, that appreciate us for the quality of the whiskey and our ethos. And beyond that, we don't have aspirations to be dominating or worldwide. We just want to be considered in the running as one of the greats, one of the great smaller distilleries of the world. So hopefully in 15, 20 years, we're a little closer to that goal. But I don't predict much change.
Had to find my mute button there real quick. So, knowing that, how do you deal with that if the next generation doesn't want to, right? Because that's always the concern is, you obviously, you followed in some footsteps here, but you've got to make it interesting for the next group of people. Because I think we saw that with some of the heritage brands over time. It was family owned, and then the family's like, we're sort of tired of this, or maybe it's a monetary situation, they sell out. Is it an innovation thing? Is it a growth thing? Like, how do you make it interesting to the next generation?
That's a great question. I have 3 boys at this point. They're all still pretty young. I hope that they'll be intrigued by joining at New Riff. I hope that by the time they're teenagers, they'll be rolling barrels in our warehouse and getting told what to do by a number of our staff. The future is open at this point. I also want to encourage them to grow and be the human beings that they're destined to be. So I can't predict. When Ken built the Party Source, it was evident early on that myself or my brother, who's a career Navyman, were not going to be the successors of the Party Source. And so ultimately, by being who we are, by being honest with what we wanted in our lives, it led to the most beautiful thing, which was the development of the ESOP. And
the employee ownership of the Party Source.
The employee ownership, right? Exactly. And I don't regret that for a second. It was absolutely the best choice. So, if we get to a situation where there is no third generation obvious successor, I trust that we will make the best choice for the business as well.
Right. John, we can't make our kids do this. They have to do what they want to do, right? Mm-hmm. So we actually have in place a mechanism, to help with that. The people that really run New Riff are not the president and the vice president and the CEO, pardon me, and people like that. We have a board of directors, John. Mm-hmm. And the job of the board of directors is to keep New Riff independent. And even if we don't have some son or daughter who wants to take it forward, that doesn't mean that the business can't go on being a family-owned entity and an independent distillery. And we hire the people that we need to do to run the place. So it's not dependent upon succession. Ken has neatly and assiduously and very intentfully solve that problem. We're not depending on, man, I sure hope one of our kids takes it on. We're not depending on that in order to stay independent. And to the point of ownership, yes, it's family owned, but we don't have any venture capital. We don't have any shareholders, partners. We have some loans from banks. We have to pay those back, but we don't have anybody out there telling us, here, you got to make this stuff cheaper. You have to sell this for $100 a bottle, and please make it 2 years old. And by the way, I need my money back. Sell it. We're not in that kind of a situation, thankfully. So the future is assured. Exactly what we're making then and things like that, we let those things work their way out.
I appreciate Jay mentioning that. That's a very important point as well. And I do want to also emphasize and celebrate the fact that with Ken's retirement, we hired a non-family member CEO to run our operations and to run the distillery currently as part of our leadership team. And that's working out great. That was the best decision for this generation. And if that ends up being the case in the third generation, that's okay too. It takes a village, right? And as long as we maintain ownership, God forbid there's no generation who wants to be actively working in the company, that's a bridge we'll cross at that point.
Yeah, and it sort of feels like, at least, I've had the opportunity to be a part of a startup, and effectively that's what you guys are, kind of at the later stages of a startup concept. Even when you're not family, you become family really quick when you hire into a smaller company like that. And Jay, you've been a part of this growing from its inception. Did you imagine that you would get to this point faster, slower, or are you exactly where you thought you were going to be?
I guess we are a little bit larger, physically speaking, in terms of our output than we thought we might be. In this picture behind me, okay, I have to go this way. Right here is a building expansion that we commissioned in 2022 with 3 more fermenters. When we opened New Riff, we had 4 fermenters, and we had infrastructure and room for 2 more. We had planned to add 2 more someday, Probably, maybe. We weren't really sure if we would add them. I thought we would add 2 more fermenters. Ken thought we'd never going to need those. We installed those in month 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a 50% expansion back in 2015. And then in 2022, we did another 50% expansion with 3 additional fermenters that are right here. And we can't get any bigger. That's it. We have maxed out the footprint of this marvelous building behind me. It's not really behind me. I'm not in the air in a drone. So we max that out. So I guess maybe we're slightly larger there than I thought we would be, but and I don't want to sound prescient or hubristic here or something, but it sort of has gone a lot like I thought it would. We made a whiskey that came out last year. Bear with me, called Sour Mash Single Malt. This is a whiskey we started working on in 2014, this project. And it came out, we are extremely pleased with how it came out in the end. Here, I'm trying to show it to you on this crazy interweb. We are extremely pleased with how it came out. And yet when we started, it was, just a wing and a prayer that let's just try making malt whiskey. What even would happen if we did? And this thing happened. And I didn't know it would taste like that or look like that or anything in 2014 when we started making malt whiskey. We just trusted to the process, to the people. We tried to do right always by the whiskey. That's a part of that ethos. We respect the whiskey. We're not here to force it into doing something it shouldn't or force it into meeting some marketing plan. It's why we don't have things like a small batch. I don't think we ever will. Maybe we'll have something called that someday. But if we did do a small batch, it would have to be a new riff on that tradition of small batch, because small batch doesn't mean a damn thing. That's why we have this commitment to bottled in bond whiskey. It's embossed in the bottle right here, bottled in bond. It's almost a little boring that every time we come out with a whiskey, it's bottled in bond. Oh, here they go again, bottled in bond. Well, we don't do it to be exciting or to hit some market segment or appeal to old man or twirly mustachioed bartenders. We do it because bottled in bond is the world's highest standard for quality in a brown spirit. It's like, what else do you want us to do? We are committed to making the best quality whiskey we possibly can. Ergo, they all are bottled in bond, except for barrel proof projects like that single malt and the single barrel that I think we're going to taste one of here in a few minutes.
And I think there's 2 things. One is a story and one is maybe a question statement. I'm going to tell you about this just monumental mistake that I made. So I went to the 2023 Kentucky Bourbon Festival, and you do your first pass. Right? You kind of look around and see what everybody's got, and I thought, New Riff has their single malt out, but this is the Bourbon Festival, so everyone's going to flock to bourbons and ryes. And so my first pass, I didn't prioritize that sampling, and I have regretted that since then. Right? Well, I wasn't betting on my flavor, my preference and flavor. I was betting on what I thought everyone else would do. Right? And I thought everyone else, they're here for the Bourbon Festival. They're going to chase it down. And American single malt single malt specifically are this kind of like new and growing thing. Even rye is talked about a little bit more than that is. I have regretted that single decision ever since then, right? Because it went super duper fast, and so that's kind of a sign of the quality of innovation, right? You can do innovation, but then you can do good innovation, right? Just because you make it doesn't mean it ever gets into a bottle. And then maybe the second part, whenever you guys decided that you're doing everything bottled in bond, now you get seasons affiliated with bottles, and wonderfully, they're labeled on the neck tags, right? You get fall 2016, spring 2017, and so forth and so on. Was that an idea to try to bring forth a vintner's concept of their yearly releases that they do? This is the 2014 Malbec or whatever, or right. Did it just sort of happen that way?
Well, so here's that bottled in bond that John is referencing, and on the necker you can see there it is. It says distilled spring 2019, spring? Well, whatever. There's a date there. Really, John, it's a nod to old time bottles, Prohibition era bottles, almost all of which were bottled in bond, and they were required at that time to list out the seasons of production and the season of bottling. And and they did it on the tax strip. I could go fetch an example and show you, but I won't bother to leave right now. That really why we have that on the necker is a little bit of a nod to that old bottle and bond tradition. And some of the deep whiskey geeks have figured that out and appreciate that. Thanks for putting the geeky term of the season on there, because there's only two of them. It's not spring, summer, fall, winter. It's spring and fall distilling seasons, and we pay a little bit of an homage to that. So that's why that's there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wondered, because Molly, a lot of your background is wine, very, very heavily wine. It's like, how much of that going to come into play? But what was that like, making a transition from a wine-based concept into spirits? It's similar category, but not the same.
No, absolutely. That's a great question. I have to say it was a little daunting initially, and I credit a lot of what I initially learned all to Jay Aresman. He's a wealth of knowledge and has an unbelievable palate. And so I said to Jay, teach me everything. I can talk about wine, but teach me about bourbon, teach me about whiskey, teach me the history of America's great native spirit. As I've been engaged in the community for over 10 years now, I find that the customer is blurring a lot more than when I initially got into the world of whiskey. 10 years ago in 2014, I felt like there were wine connoisseurs and whiskey connoisseurs, and they didn't often overlap. I could tell you about different regions of Italy or something about, I don't know, South America, but I didn't have a whole lot of American whiskey knowledge. And I think that was true for a lot of us who specialized in one or the other. And now I'm finding that connoisseur is really blurred. And now that connoisseur is someone who appreciates provenance. And that's the same person who would appreciate terroir in a wine. Someone who really wants to know that this is a distiller producer, that wants to learn about the grains, wants to know if they're GMO grains or not, wants to know if there's a farm associated with the product, and that has really changed in the past 10 years. And so that is very similar to my wine background. And I'm comfortable in the whiskey space talking about it, sometimes similarly to wine. If I host a dinner or an event, we walk through it in a very similar way, right? You do the nose and palate, and then you taste, and you pair with food often. And there's a lot of overlap. So I've really enjoyed that transition a lot. And just being in Kentucky and being a producer of America's great native spirit is really, really exciting. I never was able to do that in the wine world. We weren't, I wasn't part of a family that was making wine. So it's definitely a move forward, in my opinion, and it's awesome.
Yeah. And this is the thing that I've said before, and you said a few phrases in there, provenance, terroir, vintages. These are all things that are starting to creep into whiskey. And I've said this before, and I think, whiskey, wine, coffee people are all the exact same people. They just have chosen a different beverage to consume, and they will absolutely not agree that they're the same as the other group. But maybe to your point, they're starting to blend together, right? The whiskey nerds and the wine nerds are starting to blend together because they are speaking a lot of the same language. And it's, most of us, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's a great point, right? The whiskey nerds and the wine nerds are not drinking, crappy coffee either, right?
Right.
There is a desire for greatness in all categories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And most of us were not talking about whiskey, 15 years ago or 20 years ago as wine, and craft beer and coffee. Those have all been things, whiskey has kind of come into play in the last 20 years, really, for the nerds. So we're just adopting new ways to be, elitists a little bit, those things that sort of pop up. The whole idea of New Riff is to be a new riff on something that is very, very storied. So, what are the ways that you intend to achieve that going forward, right? Because we've seen it with a handful of releases like the Balboa and the Maltster and the Sour Mash, Kentucky Malt Whiskey. What does the future look like to keep that sort of thing going?
Right. Well, John, sometimes the riffs are heavy, man. Really heavy riffs, like the Sour Mash single malt, or some of the others you mentioned, Maltster, or when I went to Brian Sprance and asked about what about oats? Could we make Brian Sprance, our now master distiller, been with us from the beginning? Could we make oats in whiskey? What do you think about that? And his mind turned it into chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon. So there's sort of very powerful, if you will, or obviously very divergent malts like, or new riffs like that. And in the case of the single malt, for what it's worth, here the tradition we're really looking at is not sour mash Kentucky whiskey, even though we are making sour mash single malt. It's why we put it on the label. We want to make abundantly clear that malt whiskey is not supposed to be Scotch. It's not made like Scotch whiskey, but it's very much inspired by that. And in a way, what we've done with that whiskey is we took our column still, which is here in this, which way do I go? Picture behind me right there. You can see the column still. We took that and we used it like a telescope, to look at to interpret, like an interpretive lens, the malt distillery traditions in Scotland, and also the traditions of malted barley more generally. And so within that sour mash single malt project are 5 different whiskeys that we made and vatted together. And some of them are interpretations of Scotch whiskey traditions, and some of them are interpretations of brewing traditions. There's a recipe in there, for example, that is a mash bill like a barley wine or a Belgian quadruple ale. So some of those are very much riffs emerging from the grains, from whiskey traditions, from our own creativity, liquid creativity, and things like that. And then there's traditions like this riff, which was our first riff that we released, if you will, and honestly, maybe the most powerful of them all. Very subtly, this says bottled in bond, and then the rest of it says without chill filtration. And this is, most people don't think of it this way, but this is our riff on the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897. And nobody's ever done a riff on Bottled in Bond. Bottled in Bond was only and ever bottled in bond, and that's what you made, and that's it. Well, within the bonded regulations is an allowance from the federal government that it says you can't change the whiskey from its state in the barrel except by 2 ways. One of those is adding a little bit of water to bring it to the required 100 proof. So obviously you add water. The other way you're allowed to change the whiskey is through means of filtration, such as, and the language the federal government uses is chill proofing. They say you're allowed to chill proof the whiskey or other filtration regimens. Interesting, isn't it, that the federal government allows that filtration would change the whiskey. They acknowledge that inside the black and white terms of the language of the regulation itself. So from 1897, that was all Bottled in Bond was. Well, we take this modern, since about the mid 60s, people have been doing this in Scotland, beginning with Springbank Distillery. They have been bottling whiskey in a very purist, naturalistic format. To borrow a phrase from the wine industry, it's called non-interventionist, and they do not chill filter the whiskey. And we knew from day zero that New Riff would be a no chill filtration distillery right here. That we knew. We didn't know we would be bottled in bond on day zero. We didn't know we would have this emphasis on single barrels or all these crazy mash bills necessarily, but we knew we would be bottled without chill filtration. When we later committed to do bottled in bond across the board, we had to marry those 2 concepts. The quality standard of 1897, still the highest in the world, with the modern quality precept of no chill filtration that actually lifts bottled in bond to a new level, right? We are even a higher level of quality of non-intervention upon the whiskey than the bottled in bond regulations would allow. So we realized that. We said, we used actually stronger terms than that, John. But this is a family show. We're going to keep it G-rated here, right? We said to ourselves, holy moly, we are about to do a riff on Bottled and Bond. And that is deep religion in Kentucky. As far as I'm concerned, it's higher than the basketball, right? So Bottled and Bond, that's the first, that was the striking of the bell for quality in Kentucky. The first time that the Kentucky distillers, that really distillers anywhere, stood up and said, no, this is the good, true whiskey, the straight bourbon. We have to protect and delineate and define what it means to be quality. And so Bottled and Bond was the first Product Protection Act, the first Quality Protection Act in America, maybe in the world. Some people argue the Bordeaux classification of 1855 precedes that, or there might have been one in Champagne a few years before, maybe the 1870s, I'm not sure. But in America, at least, the very first thing we protected the quality of was the whiskey, not the aspirin, not the baby food, the whiskey. So you go messing around with Bottled and Bond, that's some heavy shit, man. That's really, really deep. And so that's what our Bottled and Bond without chill filtration mantra does. And it's on all of the bottles. You know, here's the malted rye, this fantastic whiskey, Bottled and Bond without chill filtration. That's just how we roll. So right there, John, is a riff that we pour on an everyday basis that is, you know, the most powerful of them all, maybe.
Yeah, and trying to change that Bottled and Bond, you know, for a lot of brands, you stick it on the label, it's just a label change. But you're talking about a distinct glass change if you were to try to get away from that concept. But and you said this, when you started out, you didn't know that you were going to be a Bottled and Bond. But as you kind of walked through this process and finally figured out what your place in the market was going to be, everything is, I believe, stated, at least every whiskey is stated, is at a minimum of 4 years aging, which puts you operating for 4 years without selling a drop of your own whiskey. How do you keep a business like that open to do that?
Each one of us sold a kidney.
Well, from what I've heard about what it costs to open and run a distillery, who else were you harvesting kidneys from? Because I don't know that you have enough people for that.
Right.
No, that's a great question. And, you know, one of the many things that we also pride ourselves on, John, is our transparency. So we were committed to releasing whiskey when the whiskey told us to, just not when we needed to, you know, make payroll and things like that. We did produce what we call an interim product, or we bought over 300 barrels from MGP. We were very, very transparent about that. We turned them into a brand that folks listening might know called OKI, which refers to Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana. A friend of ours owns that brand now and is continuing the brand. We don't have anything more to do with it. But we were playing around and we were selling that brand in the interim. We made some fantastic gin. Actually, this is Jay's gin recipe that we continue to this day. We sold gin and bourbon barrel aged gin in the interim. But in all transparency, the real way we kept the lights on was we did some contract work. And we're not ashamed of that. We don't necessarily share who our contracts are with, but we came on the scene at a very interesting time when the boom was booming. And there were a number of large, you know, heritage distilleries who were not renewing contracts for very established brands because they wanted to make more production for themselves. And so it was a very serendipitous time for us. One of the reasons, as Jay pointed out, that we had to add fermenters at about month 10. But it was a wonderful way for us to remain independent and have some cash flow as we patiently waited for our own products to come of age. So, you know, things like that, things like our water source, the Aquifer, you know, meant that we were meant to have a distillery in the exact time that we were on the place that we were. There were so many factors that just came together beautifully to make who we were. You have to thank someone for that.
Yeah, and you know, having a brand like OKI to sell, and then subsequently letting that go, that feels like that would probably be a tough decision, because while it is not your current brand, it's something that you were deeply affiliated with. What's that like, handing that over to someone else and hoping, you know, that it sort of, you know, stays a positive brand, right? Because once you sell it, you can't do anything about it. But like, how do you manage that?
Well, we had no plans, John, to sell it. We just had some friends of ours locally that approached us with the interest in doing it, and that's really why we had no intention to let it live on. I mean, we were just going to put it to sleep and never do anything with it. So that was all there was really to that.
Well, and we've made the commitment from day one, John, that we don't want to put our name on anything that's not distilled at New Riff in our facility. So that's a very another pillar of importance for us. And that's why we were so extremely transparent about OKI. We built that brand, we're very proud of it. We used to go out when it was not a known brand, and we would show it to people and hope they'd buy it. It came a long way in a very short amount of time, and that was super exciting. But we, like as Jay said, we always knew that was not going to be a continuation of what we were doing. We wanted to make sure the brands were very different. So when we made the change and focused only on New Riff, that it was understood in the marketplace that everything that New Riff puts in bottle is distilled in-house.
Mm-hmm. And I think, one of the things that at least gives the consumer some confidence, what good tastes like. OKI proved that New Riff as a brand knew what good would taste like, and they knew how to get there when their distillate was right and ready and able to kind of, go into a bottle and be sold. Everybody had that confidence, because if you run into a new brand anytime that has done sourcing and then moves to their own, if they didn't do anything really well with the sourcing, then you start questioning, like, is their product going to be any good, right? So you had a standard, you set a standard in front of yourself. It was pretty good. And, oddly enough, last week I was sitting down with the folks from High and Wicked, right? And so you have this rye that has your name on it, which is sort of unheard of. Now, I don't want to say unheard of is the wrong phrase probably there, but most of the time when people do contract distilling, it ends up hiding behind NDAs and a whole host of things, right? But it came out of your distillery and you feel proud enough to put your name on it no matter what. And so that, I think that kind of goes to another level of testament. You trust the brand not to sort of, not to mess it up. So you said the aquifer, which jogged something in my brain as well. You have the aquifer where you get the water, but then there's this other aquifer. Can you tell me a little bit about the other aquifer?
Right. So on this, the building behind me here is the aquifer. You see, oops, it's a 100-foot deep well right there in the parking lot that provides the distillery with production water. That's the whiskey, that's the water that becomes the whiskey, and it is a limestone-rich water, primarily derived from the hills that are to the south of the distillery. Right back there, you can't see them, but there in the far distance are these hills that are full of limestone, and the groundwater from those hills goes down into our aquifer, and we pull it up in this 100-foot deep well. Absolutely magically serendipitous situation to have a distillery in the parking lot, and right underneath it is this fantastic distilling water, which also provides most of the cooling water for the distillery. So it hugely cuts our electrical consumption, our fossil fuel expenditure, really. We don't have to run refrigeration in order to chill warm city water. And most of the big distilleries, they all run on city water. None of them run on a groundwater source the way they often purport that they do. The limestone water and everything, so famous in Kentucky, the horses and everything. And I can't speak for the horses, but the distilleries don't operate on that. They operate on tap water. So we were really blessed to have this aquifer source. And then on the third floor of the distillery right there, you can see these things that look like garage doors, and there's a little deck, and you see floral arrangements. That's our third floor situation going on there. It was an event center when we built New Riff, and we had lots of weddings and receptions and all sorts of things up there. And after the pandemic, when all that went away, we realized, we'd rather just have a great New Riff bar. And so we opened a fantastic whiskey library up there. We dubbed it the Aquifer in a testimony to our water source, and maybe also a little bit of we're going to water everybody else here in the Aquifer. And it's a whiskey library. It's got bottles of everything we ever made and fantastic cocktails. It's a beautiful situation, and please come check it out if you're in Greater Cincinnati.
And just to echo what Jay said, it is our whiskey library. We don't have other producers. We do offer beer and wine. but it is focused on what New Riff makes. And we have bottles of everything that we've ever made, actually, and we'll continue to do so until they run out. But it's an exciting place to learn the history, to drink the history of New Riff. And as we grow and as the years pass, it will get even more and more exciting.
Yeah, and you answered my question. Now I know where I need to go to get some more of the Kentucky single malt, right? The release from last year's Kentucky Bourbon Festival that I missed out on. So kind of pivoting a little bit, I guess maybe we'll talk about single barrels for a minute, right? And so I have a single barrel. I think you guys actually have 4 of them, but one that you guys were to pass on. Can you tell me about the process to get into a single barrel selection for anybody, for that matter?
Mm-hmm. Well, we had such a heck of a good time, John, at the Party Source back in the day, working with Kentucky's distilleries to make our own private selections at the Party Source. We had, being the largest store in the state, we had unusually close access to the warehouses and the barrels, and we sometimes initiated distilleries single barrel private selection offerings and other whiskey projects and things like that. So we had a lot of fun doing that and really got close with those distilleries. And frankly, that was a huge influence in opening New Riff for ourselves. But we wanted, we were pretty sure as we started to launch New Riff and get ready for that in 2018, that we wanted to bring that fun experience to our customers and our consumers. And so to that end, we run I guess the word is robust, private barrel selection program for a distillery of our size. In terms of the percentage of barrels, first of all, that become single barrels, and secondly, that become private selection single barrels of bourbon and rye, whether selected by retailers, bars, restaurants, or private consumers or consumer groups. We do single barrel selections for bourbon societies, for banks, for law firms that I need 100 Christmas presents for my best clients. Could I do a private barrel? We do things like that. Civic organizations, all sorts of different places and entities have selected a private barrel at New Riff. And we think it's a really enriching way to connect with bourbon and to intersect with the bourbon industry. Far richer than in the old days. There was a bottle on the shelf and you bought it because there was an ad in a magazine or you saw a billboard that day, and you had become a blank consumer. You were a blank man or a blank woman, and that was your brand, and that was all you ever did with whiskey. And you might love it and you might drink it every day, but how much more intimate when you are picking a barrel and identifying differences and touring the warehouse, smelling the breathing barrels and everything. So we wanted to bring that to our customers, and it's been a really, it's a lot of work on our end, a lot of people, a lot of salaries. We have an entire department of people doing nothing but organizing this, but it's worth every bit and worth every penny to bring our message and our ethos to our friends and fans. So the process for that is, you get in touch with, you can find them at our website, inquiries about how to get into a private barrel. We do that in our market and to our trade partners, generally through our distributors. So if we're distributed in the state of whatever, Texas, it is our Texas distributor that will connect a store or a bar with an opportunity to have a barrel. And there's a wait, happily, because we are a relatively small and nimble distillery. The wait is not all that long, much shorter time frame than many of the much larger businesses and slower moving. And on the consumer side, we connect the same way. Reach out to the distillery. There are pages at our website that will help you navigate to that, and folks can come and choose a barrel. It's a lot of fun.
I will absolutely. It is a lot of fun. I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to sit in on a barrel pick at New Riff, very specifically. And how you've got a staff that does this, so maybe you can answer this, maybe you can't. But like, how do you go about picking what barrels will be a part of it, because it's not just, you don't just walk through the rick house and say, I want the barrel that's 17 barrels back and 4 levels high, because that logistically is a nightmare. Do you guys identify barrels that are unique? Do you identify barrels that sort of exemplify New Riff but maybe turn to 12 instead of 10 or whatever? How do you go about that?
Well, every batch of aging barrels as they come to 4 years old is evaluated by our sensory team and checked out for quality and uniqueness. When it comes to choosing barrels that are single barrels, we accept a very wide range of flavor. We don't want a barrel with some, maybe it needs more aging. It's not quite ready at 4 years old. But aside from something like that, which is not all that common, we are happy if a barrel is sweet and a honey barrel, a honey pot, or as people call it. We're happy if a barrel is drier and spicy. We regard that entire spectrum as delicious, and we're not here to pick a certain flavor. Well, we want to get all of the sweet ones and make those the single barrels. Well, okay, that would rob a lot of think of it as the genetic material, right? New Riff can taste like all these different flavors. Let's just say there's 10 main flavors. There's not. There's many more than that. Well, we want all of those going into our bottled and bond whiskey. We believe all of those are delicious, and we believe all of those could be a single barrel. So we're not looking necessarily for all of the spicy ones or all of the sweet or the dry ones. We are open to a very wide range of flavor in our whiskeys. I think as a whiskey nerd, I find that fascinating. I wouldn't want it any other way.
I'll agree, because we went in to do the pick, and it was a friend of mine was the primary on it, and he, we sat down, and I think there was 5 whiskeys in front of us, and I picked my number 1, and that was the first one. He was like, "This is not the one for us," because it was too far out there for them, and that's where but for everyone, there's 8 or 10 of us there. There was enough there for us to talk about variation. I've been a part of barrel picks before where they all felt like varying shades of the same color. That wasn't necessarily the case, and I enjoy that. I prefer that, because then you really get to sort of kind of explore the edges of a brand, explore the edges of what is possible out of that, instead of finding something that's the same but turned up a little bit or just a slight shade off of it. So there's a handful of things that are going on with you guys right now, right? So some releases that are important. We've got an 8-year bourbon that is out right now. Can you tell me a little bit about the 8-year bourbon?
Mm-hmm. Well, we wanted to, we waited at least 4 years. We committed going in before we would release anything. Ken and I set that initial goal. And if the whiskey wasn't ready at 4, we had to go to 5. Well, we just have to do that. Happily, the compliment we get most often, I think maybe, is people tasting our whiskey and say, man, I can't believe it's this good for just 4 years old. That tells us we really did our job. But as much acclaim and sweeping the table with double gold medals at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition in 2019 and moments of acclaim like that we've had for this 4-year-old, we know, and we knew going in, the real glory, if we want to be one of the world's great small distilleries, it's got to happen also with older whiskey. And so from the beginning, we've been holding back 20 to 30% of everything we made across the board, which I think is probably pretty generous, because there were moments we could have sold it all. People would have taken it all, and we held it back, didn't sell those, didn't make money on those yet. We're still, sitting on that money in the warehouse. But we wanted it to be older. And now we judged that we didn't go into that saying, well, we need an 8-year-old. That's how old it's going to be. We just let the whiskey talk to us and let our, positioning in the marketplace and when are we ready to release something older? Should it be 12? Should we wait until 10? And we thought making it twice as old as the standard stuff, there was sort of a good, math to that. We could have gone at 6, but that's not really enough of an improvement. If you're going to go to 7, you might as well go to 8. And so we have come out with this 8-year-old. There will be further releases in the future of other older New Riff whiskeys. But here in 2024, we have finally got out to an 8-year-old. And I am thrilled with I don't really care in a way whether it tastes this way or that way, or whether it's sweet or whether it's spicy or dry or anything. What I am most looking at an 8-year-old whiskey for us, it really is well explained by the wine analogy. By you have a wine cellar and you've got bottles in there of, you know, the world's greatest wine region, probably Bordeaux. So you've got this Bordeaux and it ages well, right? It's going to age for 10 years or 15 or 20 years. And you say, let's taste this Bordeaux. It's 8 years after the vintage. How's it doing? And maybe it's on maybe it's ready to drink and it's not going to get any better. Or maybe it's not ready yet. Or maybe you taste and say it's delicious, but you know what? This stuff could last. This could go another 10 years in my cellar, I think. That's how we evaluate aging wine. And bourbon's a different matter because it doesn't age in the bottle, but it is aging in the barrel. And so when I taste that 8-year-old, I'm looking for, number one, is it too old? Has it not made it to 8 years with good balance and ripe flavor? Is it too tannic? Because there are whiskey distilleries in Kentucky, big famous brands, I'm not going to name any names, who, in my opinion and in their opinion, the producers, it just didn't do very well past about 6 or 7 years old. And at 8 or 9 years old, that given whiskey is kind of over the hill. And it's too tannic and it's dry and it's just, nobody likes it. And then there are bourbons that age well out to 10, 12, 15 years with regularity. We wanted to be in that latter camp, and we wanted to be like the great wines of the world. We wanted to be one of those that can make the old bones. You know what I mean? That can sustain out to 10, 12, 15 years. Now, I don't know what it's going to taste like at 15, but it has made it to 8 years old without breaking a sweat. And that's really what I was looking for.
Yeah, that's exciting, at least from my perspective, because, you know, the first I had an opportunity to taste this a few weeks ago from a friend who had sent me a sample, and then I've had a second chance, and I saved back. He sent me a little 50 milliliter bottle, and I drank like a third of it, and I'm like, I got to save the rest of it for the rest of the year, and now I have a little more to play with. But it was the first, 8 to 10ish. Honestly, it tastes like it's 10, but you know. That's my perspective, and not in a bad way, right? Because 10 could also taste bad, but in a very good way. It tastes like most of your products do, that they're aged a little longer than they actually are. But it made this transition where the nose of it smelled like a maraschino cherry, but the taste of it tasted like a Luxardo, which was a really good turn for me, right? Because it was like a really sweet cherry, and then it got a deeper flavor. And some of these overaged, that's the wrong term. Some of these aged whiskeys, you get beat over the head with the wood flavor, and the wood flavor doesn't really it plays a role in it, but it doesn't play the significant role until the finish for me, right? This is how it finishes. It finishes a little bit drying and a little bit wood and very complete. It felt very, very complete. And it, you know, puts me in a position of, okay, now what does a 10-year version of this taste like? What does a 15-year version of this taste like? And, you know, it begs the question, is your old whiskey, but what are the odds of seeing a 10-year whiskey in the next year from the Riff?
Well, John, we are as we've mentioned, a big value of ours is transparency, and we talk when we have a whiskey. We are wide open about talking about it. The single malt, for example, if you'd like to visit, and maybe you could supply a link later, there's a blog post on our website that tells the entire long story. It's a big, huge, long blog post. Too long, didn't read, that kind of thing. But explaining that, it's completely transparent. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we come out in advance, John, with all of our plans and strategic releases and things like that. We didn't tell you 6 months ago you'd be getting an 8-year-old, so I'm not going to tell you today when you'll get a 10 or an 11. Ooh, maybe it'll be an 11. But trust that there are older things coming out. We are all dying to see when what this stuff tastes like at 15. But when do we have a 15? Honestly, I don't know. It's not when we're 15 years old, because we have to have a depth of stock behind us in order to make that thing sustainable. We have 10-year-old bourbon sitting in the warehouse right now. We're 10 years old. We saved back a few barrels from batch number 1. Can you have it? No, there's only 3 or 4 barrels left. We don't have very much. That's not enough to come to market with. So if you wanted to wonder when there will be a 10, it won't be when we're 10 years old. That's now. But we just don't have enough 10-year-old at all, or even 9-year-old to make those kind of ages. We'll get there. Patience, so John. Patience.
Yeah.
Patience.
Okay. Hey, you know that's we whiskey nerds are not patient people. You know, for following a spirit that takes years to come of age, we are absolutely notorious for not being patient. All of us nerds, we just expect you to take care of it now. You know, to that end, you know, you guys are celebrating your 10th anniversary. Are there some happenings, some things that you guys can talk about that are happening around the distillery? That folks might have interest in showing up for?
Most definitely. So we've got big celebration plans for a 10th anniversary. It will be in July, because we do want to have an opportunity to taste at least something with our 10-year-old juice. There will be a blend available of it's our first blended whiskey like this, of bourbon and rye and malted rye. It will be, and actually a malt whiskey. It'll be called Headliner, and that will be a celebration of our 10-year-old whiskey. But we have to wait until that stuff is 10 years old, and it turns 10 years old in late June. And so we will have a significant 10th anniversary celebration and party, really a week celebration at the distillery later in July.
And so the release that's coming out, I think is called Headliner. Is that a correct statement?
That's right. That will be a gift shop only release, and it will have a charity aspect to it as well. We would like to take the opportunity of our 10th anniversary and all the attention that will garner to help out some local organizations. And so Headliner will be have a charity component to it as well.
And I think I read one more thing to make sure I have my facts details correct here. Did I read that these bottles are going to be screen printed?
They will have a label design. I'm not exactly sure. I don't think it's a screen printing on the bottle, because this is a very limited run, and it's difficult to do a run of several hundreds of bottles that are only sold in the gift shop with an exotic screen printing.
And then I guess, we are pushing up on time, and I could talk for another hour at this point. And we haven't even talked very much about the rye yet. I've got this. This is the one thing that I did absolutely pick up from the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, was the 6-year malted rye.
Mm-hmm.
And malted rye feels like got to go the right direction. Malted rye feels like it's starting to pick up steam, or pick up some bit of a name within the whiskey marketplace in North America, because I've seen a few brands do it very, very recently. Some do it well, some don't do it super well. Tell me what put you guys in let's go ahead and do this 100% malted rye whiskey.
Right. Well, we were already working with malted rye in our rye whiskey mash bill. That is a mash bill of 95% rye, 5% malted rye. You can find that mash bill on the back of our bottled and bond rye. Right here it says 95% rye, 5% malted rye. There you go. Your camera's better than mine. So we already had that in the distillery, and decided to make a version that was 100% malted rye. And we honestly, in all my years at the Party Source and being a whiskey lover, I had tasted exactly one malted rye whiskey. It was there was only one in the country as far as I knew then. Actually, it was Old Potrero, the distillery. It was from then called the Anchor Distilling in San Francisco. And that was the only one on the market. And it didn't really, it's a cool whiskey, Old Potrero. It didn't really tell us a lot about what our whiskey, sour mash, column distilled in Kentucky, would taste like. And so I wondered, man, what happens when you malt the rye grain? What happens to the flavor? And what if it became spicier? What if it ramps up the spicy flavors? I thought that would be really cool, man. Sign me up. But that's not what happened. As you taste that there, it became soft, elegant, sophisticated. It alters the character of the grain. Many people would say for the better. or at least for the more sophisticated, and in particular this flavor, the number one word people come up with is it's so soft. It's a delicate rye whiskey, where traditionally rye whiskeys like our 95% rye, 5% malted rye, which is 100% rye in that mash bill, if you think about it, have so much potent flavor. And here the malted rye is gentler. So it's a fascinating whiskey, and a 6-year-old too. We allowed it to get a little bit extra old to be extra good. It was bloody good at 4, or for that matter, 3 years old, John, but we wanted it to be kind of an exclamation point.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that is unique about this, is that, in most businesses that are selling rye, they feel very comfortable at a 2 to 3 year time frame because it ages at a different rate.
It does age
it
faster
just
than
ages
bourbon.
differently. It ages differently than bourbon does, and it's ready at a younger age. Going to 4 kind of puts it above a level, but then taking this one to 6, if I think about the bottled and bond rye, that's the 4 year, I get a good amount of, cedar woody on a nose, and I get a toasted baking spice on a taste, and then more of a sweet feed on the finish, right? So like horse sweet feed. But the malt, and there's this term, right, that can be used so poorly. It gives it a funk to me, but not like a taste or smell funk, but like music, like whenever music hits that particular funk where it's not beating you over the head, but it adds a little bit of a groove to it. That's exactly what a well malted rye does, in the couple that I've ever been able to taste, but not a ton of people are doing it. I haven't had a New Riff offering that I have disliked. Now, I also haven't had gin, but I don't really like gin, so that might be the thing that would
I'll keep
throw
you in
me
my
off.
prayers, John.
Yeah, well, and I know that's one of the things you guys do really well. It's just, and maybe it's a bias from childhood. My dad was a big gin and tonic drinker, and smelling it wasn't a thing for me as a child. I'm like, this is not going to work out. We've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything that we've sort of left out? We've got some activities that are happening around the distillery in July to sort of celebrate this milestone, which is pretty significant. While you may still be kind of new, you're not really new anymore, because you have been around for 10 years, right? But you're still doing new things. You've got a release that's distillery only. So if you're the type of person that likes to travel for whiskey experiences, this is probably one that you should track down. But we barely even touched on the releases, right? The bottled and bond rye, the bottled and bond whiskey, the single barrels, the malted rye, the 8 year, what would be sort of the through line that you would always want to put against what New Riff is doing as a distillery?
Well, I think the through line is we love whiskey. We respect the flavor of the whiskey and want to make mucho gusto whiskey. We want to make whatever they are, whiskeys that are taste of themselves. They taste correct to what they are. The vintner's term would be varietally correct. That goes for the gin too, for that matter. We wanted to make a gin lover's gin, not a gin like I used to hear about in my retail days, a gin that vodka lovers might enjoy. We wanted to make a gin lover's gin, a gin that gin lovers love. So that's what we want to make is flavorsome, dense, powerful whiskeys that have integrity to their own flavor and to their design goals. Something we haven't really jumped into is wine barrel finishes. That's probably a good example where a given distillate can become any host of different products just with a different finish. And I like finished whiskey fine. I think it makes a lot of sense in other traditions where the whiskey doesn't have as much wood to begin with because they use used cooperage and things like that. I've not really been the biggest fan over my career of finished American whiskey, bourbons and ryes, because they already do have so much wood. And to me, it doesn't always work, but it can work. It's a fun enough thing. But if we did it, it's got to have a new riff. It's got to have a story. It's got to have a compelling reason to exist. And then when it does, it has to be true to itself. And so we don't want to just take, our bourbon and smash a red wine of the month on top of it. Let's go find a wine that no one else has ever done a finish of, brother. I got a list a mile long. Okay. I can find you distinct and unusual cast that you can't even write, in that language every day, days a week, and twice on Sunday. Well, what's the point of that? What is that really doing for the whiskey? And often I think people make those just so they can have more things to sell and more SKUs in the marketplace. And we never wanted to do things like that. So I guess there's maybe a certain integrity to design and to thought process that our whiskeys need to hew to, and that we adhere to in our whiskey making.
And I think you guys have been very successful at that. Now I definitely want to be aware of time, because we're a little bit over time, and that's the one thing that you can't make more of. You can make more of a lot of things, but not time is not one of them. I think that's the thing that New Riff is very successful at, right? You see a lot of brands that are out doing unique finishes, and the thing about that is it is exactly what you just identified, is that you do one, and then everybody says, okay, what's the next one? What's the next one? What's the next one? And it's a good way to get attention real fast, but getting sustained attention, getting sustained buy-in from consumers comes from producing quality foundational products. You still do your innovation, right? But the innovation isn't the primary course of the distillery. The primary course is sustained quality, sustained development, and that feels like what New Riff has done. I mean, your expansions, I think, are evidence of that. The both physically expansion and line expansions, they feel more methodical and planned out. And it kind of goes back to the testament of you're trying to grow a business, not something to sell. So
that's right.
But thank you so much for the time. If there's anything else you want to touch on, now is your chance. If not, we'll put a pin in this. And like I said, I'm nowhere near done with questions, but we're
well, John, how about keep your eyes peeled for New Riff Sour Mash Single Malt Edition the second. It'll be out sometime this fall. I don't know the exact date, but let's make sure you taste some this time, my friend. And it will change a little bit from the first one. And in the meantime, I invite everyone to come to New Riff in July. The exact dates are to be determined. It would be somewhere in the range of the third week of July, but check our website for that. This would indeed, John, as you mentioned, I dare say, be an excellent year to visit Kentucky and hit the Bourbon Trail, because you do have an easily accessible distillery right here in northern Kentucky, close to the airport, that is going to have a hell of a party in July. Yeah. And I encourage everyone to come visit, including yourself, John, and you will find in the Aquifer bar bottles of that Sour Mash Single Malt where you can catch up and taste it. And the first round's on me.
Yeah, I can absolutely promise you, if that is at the Kentucky Bourbon Festival again this year, it will be the first thing that I will consume, right, even before the seagrass slushy that they make over at Barrel, right, which is what everybody's favorite seemed to be. This will be the first stop for me. So, like I said, Jay, thank you so much for the time that you've given me.
My pleasure.
I'm always super, super appreciative for it. Thanks for tuning in to this episode from the EmbellishPod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you have to be consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using EmbellishPod, or give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and more. Thanks for stopping by.